And all over Europe, governments are struggling to curb radicalisation. Today, the UK unveiled the Educate Against Hate campaign, a website for parents and teachers to help tackle extremist ideology. British lawyer Tasnime Akunjee is critical of the UK's strategy. He represents the families of two of the three East London girls who fled to Syria last February, and he joins me now. First, to your reaction to Atika's piece, which I know you were watching there, what do you think of the French approach, the counselling, but also, as we heard there, the testimony of those who come back being used to stop others getting radicalised? What do you think of it?
Well, it's exactly the sort of approach we advocate on the UK side, and frankly we're at a bit of a loss as to why the UK government haven't adopted a similar strategy to try and dissuade young girls from finding themselves in a war zone. There are returnees here. They clearly have a story to tell, and indeed the power of propaganda often doesn't actually continue its force when it's confronted with actual truth and reality. So the idea that we don't allow them to speak freely is a bit of an own goal. I think the French seem to have got the mix right on that front.
I want to talk a little bit more about the UK plans in a moment, but let's go back to those three girls who went to Syria from the UK, who you're only too familiar with. What do you know about their situation as it stands now?
Well, unfortunately, what we know really dates back to mid-December. On the last contact we had, the girls managed to make a very brief contact with the families, and they simply explained that they were in health, but that bombing was continuing, Russian bombing at the time, quite close to them. Communications were likely to be disrupted, and not to worry too much if contact was lost. That was all they were able to communicate at that time, and that was mid-December.
So great concerns about them. You know, the UK government, let's go back to that, unveiling this Educate Against Hate program today, and unveiling it, by the way, at the very school those three girls attended. It's an attempt to blunt the extremist message, head it off, better monitor kids, but you're sceptical.
Well, I am, frankly. The Prevent strategy and the Channel program are the two main heads of what's known as Contest, the policy idea behind tackling radical or violent extremism. Now, these policies have been evolving for nearly a decade now, and frankly have just simply attracted criticism, more so and ever more piled on as the years roll by. They simply just do not seem to meet the challenge of what it is that we've been facing.
I guess people could look at that and say, well, it's easy to criticise. At least they're doing something. Something's being attempted to combat the ISIS message that there needs to be a counter-narrative. What should, in your view, that counter-narrative be if not these measures, if these measures aren't resonating?
Well, you see, there's a difference between measures and a narrative. There are measures put in place. There's a curtailment of what some may say free speech by removing certain speakers or banning people from speaking about certain topics. That is a measure. In terms of a narrative, I actually am not aware of a effective counter-narrative that the British government has actually developed.
What would you suggest?
With the Well, actually, with Bouchard, the lady in France, she speaks about meeting the challenge of it through empathy rather than through pure logic, reason, or argument through religious edict. And she seems to be having some success with that. And frankly, the issue to do with the returnees is one of actually counselling, or fairly uniquely targeted counselling. The issue to do with dissuading people from going over there is an issue of information. And the people with the best message, the most effective and trustworthy message, are the people who made the very bad mistake of going over there, but then seeing the error of their ways, then returned. Now, there is no more credible voice than that.
It certainly would make sense. I mean, I wanted to ask you about David Cameron's idea of mandatory English lessons, but curiously, with the risk of being tossed out of the country if they fail, offering to help learn English is one thing, threatening deportation if you fail is quite another. How's that likely to go down in immigrant communities, especially given that many ISIS members speak beautiful English?
Well, what's interesting is that the majority of the propaganda coming out of ISIS territory is actually in English, not in Bengali, Pakistani, Urdu, or in various other target ethnic community languages. And on top of that, what's really quite amusing about the whole scenario, if amusement can be found, is that given that yesterday Cameron said that he pulled a figure out of the air, 20% of Muslim women don't speak English, and in his view this contributes to the problem of radicalization. The government's own website for dealing with de-radicalization is only found in English. So it seems that they seem to have missed their own particular mark when it comes to the strategy that they're trying to effect. It just goes to show the sort of misthinking that's going on here.
I have to point out, you've been accused, and you know this only too well, you've been accused of being sympathetic to people who have joined, terror groups, extremist groups. Some question your own ties to radicals within the community. You've been quoted advising Muslims not to cooperate with anti-terror police. How do you defend those accusations?
Well, where we have a situation where we have a counterproductive strategy being levied against a particular community, then it is my advice not to cooperate with something that's entirely counterproductive. At the end of the day, that's a blanket statement, but when it comes to a specific scenario, that has to be tailored in terms of legal advice. I'm a lawyer that deals in criminal defense, specializing somewhat in terrorism and terrorism-related matters. If I am accused of having links through my work to people I defend, then I am fully guilty of that. That is the sum total of the accusations levied against me.
Appreciate you joining us, Tasnime Akunjee, who is a British lawyer. Thanks so much.